Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Flood Risk and Recovery Series brought to you by Louisiana Realtors in conjunction with Fema and the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development. Joining us today are Giron, Regional Flood Insurance Liaison of Fema, Rebecca Dake, Training and Outreach Specialist, Richard Morris, Voluntary Agency Liaison, and Pam Lightfoot, State CRS Program Manager, NFIP Office, LA DOTD. We are offering this monthly series to provide realtors with helpful information and an opportunity to pose questions regarding flood insurance, disaster preparation, and recovery. We hope this will help you in the field as you work with your clients. Today's session is Know the Difference Between Flood Insurance and Disaster Assistance. Questions can be posed in the chat box. At this time, all participants will be muted to ensure the quality of the presentation. Please check out the remaining topics on our website at www.larealtors.org. Also, as a reminder, Louisiana Realtors has a disaster resources page on our website under the Realtors tab. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Angela. My name is Rebecca Dake. And for today's presentation, we really want to arm you with the information so that so you understand, you have the knowledge that you need, so you're not frustrated after an event happens. If you live in Louisiana, you need flood insurance. So we want you to understand, what does your flood insurance cover? What does it not cover? And same thing, if there's a federally declared disaster, we want you to understand, what does that disaster assistance typically cover? What does it typically not cover? Arming you with the information, helps you be informed. And these are things that you can also pass on to your clients. So we're so happy to be presenting to you today. Angela introduced all of our speakers. So we'll hear from all of us today. So I'm going to pass it over to Gil. I'm sorry, Pam.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, most flood events are localized and don't rise to the level of a federal disaster declaration. It's important to get flood insurance because flood insurance claims can be made at any time. The average all-time NFIP claim payment in Louisiana is about $55,000. Without flood insurance, most of your clients are going to have to pay out of pocket or take out loans, even face bankruptcy if they are unable to manage paying for their losses and paying for things like mortgage payment. Alrighty, next. Jim?
So a couple things to understand about flood insurance is there are some statutory limits. And they're actually very generous limits. For residential structures, you can purchase up to $250,000 worth of coverage for your structure and another $100,000 for your content. It's important as we continue with this presentation, you understand the difference between building coverage and content coverage. So I like to use this analogy. If you put your house in the palm of your hand and you turn it upside down, everything that you shake and that comes out is your content. So you have to have a separate policy for your content as well. Now, when we're talking about non-residential, in FEMA's eyes, you're either a residential, you're a house, or you're non-residential, something commercial like. So even non-residential or commercial can get up to $500,000 with their coverage for their building, plus another $500,000 of content coverage. So the amounts go up considerably for your non-residential. Another thing we want you to remember is that flood insurance is available in any flood zone. So as long as the only requirement is that the community is a participating member of the National Flood Insurance Program. A lot of times we'll get calls that insurance agents have told people that you cannot buy flood insurance because you are outside of the special flood hazard area. That's simply not the case. Doesn't matter if you're an X zone, if you're A, E, B, B, E, as long as your community is a participating member of the NFIP, you can get flood insurance. Okay, now coverage for your structure is separate from your content. Remember that. The only exception is if you have a preferred risk policy. We find these policies outside of the special flood hazard area in areas that are what we call zone X or areas of minimal flooding. This is a very good product because you roll your content and your structure into one policy, and for PRP, for a preferred risk policy, those rates are very affordable. It is one of our best products that we have under the NFIP. Now, one of the most important things to remember about flood insurance, if you come in as new business and you are outside of a real estate transaction, okay? So if you're not closing, there is a mandatory 30-day wait for the policy to go effective. This is really important because we are already in hurricane season. So if an event were to come in, and let's say, for example, you buy your flood insurance policy today and an event hits in 2 weeks, it does not meet the 30-day wait period, so therefore your claim will be denied. So a couple of exceptions about that. One of them is during closing time, buying a new home. Really important. So at close, get that flood insurance policy and you will have a zero wait. And that just provides you with a little bit more of a peace of mind. Now, Pam, why don't you tell us a story about your content experience coverage from the 2016 flooding event?
Yes, my neighborhood did get flooded in 2016. And what was surprising to hear was that a lot of my neighbors and other people that I talked to didn't have content coverage. They just had for the building. And that surprised me because I figured if you're going to get coverage on your building, you're going to get content, because just to me, they go together. But I guess I don't know if they just didn't know they could get content coverage, but it was really surprising that a lot of people did not have content coverage.
Thank you, Pam. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is covered by the NFIP insurance? Well, we cover electrical and plumbing systems, furnaces and water heaters. Now, these are all that are found inside of the home itself. Okay, so if any major component for your home, such as your furnace, AC, as long as inside, are going to be covered. We can refrigerators, cooking stoves, all those built-in appliances are covered. Permanently installed carpeting, and as long as you have content insurance, maybe some other carpeting may be covered as well. Permanently installed cabinets, paneling, bookcases, window blinds, all those are covered under the NFIP. So imagine trying to have to replace all of these components without having a flood insurance policy. You would be left holding the bag. You might get some disaster assistance, which we'll talk about later on, but it's not going to be anywhere near enough to cover. Now, a couple things about content. Here's really something important. Renters can get content only coverage for their belongings inside of an apartment or any building that they rent. It's really important to remember, because as an owner of that building, you know, the investors or whoever owns it is going to protect their asset. And they're not necessarily going to keep their renters in mind when it comes to content only. And renters can get content only insurance for a few $100s for thousands of dollars of coverage. Really important. So it's going to cover personal belongings. Remember, I mentioned the house, turn upside down, shake it, all that stuff that falls out. It's going to be your content. A couple other things that we'll cover is washer and dryer, portable and air conditioners, you know, the window type unit, something that's not permanently attached, that won't be covered under the building. Microwave ovens, carpets that are not included in the coverage for the structure, such as throw carpets you have on your floors. So those are a couple of the items that are covered and under the building and under content. And it's important to remember that there is a difference. So if you have a standard flood insurance policy, your building will be covered. But if you don't have a content policy to go with that, we will not cover the content. So make sure that you have both of them and be prepared for the hurricane season that is upon us.
Gil, would that typically be like if I have a federally backed mortgage? Again, I'm probably in that high risk flood area. And so is my lender kind of, you know, telling me, hey, you need building coverage to cover that amount of your loan? Is that why typically you might think that somebody might not have contents coverage or not know that they would need contents coverage separately?
Well, no, because when you have mandatory purchase requirements, the lenders notify the homeowners that insurance is required. They don't put a forced place on. They give the homeowner the opportunity to buy their flood insurance first. So depending on the agents that they visit, I encourage people to get multiple quotes, not because you're price matching. The prices are going to be across the board, but because you're looking for someone who is knowledgeable and experienced in writing flood insurance policy. And when they get the right information from an informed agent, they will tell them the advantages of being covered both for the building, which is a requirement under the mandatory purchase, and also having content. They'll explain to them that without content insurance, they will be left holding the bag to replace all of their content material at one time. So mandatory purchase really just reflects the building itself. It's dependent on the knowledge and experience of the agent who explains the content and how important that coverage is.
Great tip there. And then Richard, on the FEMA disaster assistance side, is this something that you hear about from disaster survivors as well, when there is, you know, a federally declared disaster that sometimes people don't know, you know, maybe they thought, hey, I have flood insurance, but maybe they didn't know about contents coverage or didn't have it?
Yeah, so generally, whenever there is a federal disaster declaration for a flooding event, such as the recent May event, we do hear information such as that, because we know that people generally want to cover their structure, but don't sometimes always know that they can get that contents coverage, or they either just don't update the policy, or they just don't have it at all.
Super important. All right, back to you, Gil.
All right. So we talked about some items that are covered under the NFIP. Let's talk about some items that are not. So what NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program, the insurance side of this, what we won't cover is temporary housing and additional living expenses incurred while the building is being repaired are unable to be occupied. We're not saying some type of disaster assistance may not be available for housing, but not under the NFIP. Property outside, this is really important to remember, because the standard flood insurance policy is going to cover the building itself and the content if it's part of it. So items outside may be will not be covered under a single peril policy. Now, I'm not saying that you can get additional policies. For example, if you have a detached garage, you could buy a separate policy for that as well, and have all of your buildings on your property covered under a NFIP contract, which would have multiple policies on there. So other things that won't be covered: landscaping, wells, septic systems, decks and patios. Those are outside of your home. The primary purpose of the flood insurance is to get you back into your home, where you have a safe and secure place to live after a flooding event. We also won't cover financial losses due to business interruption. We're not going to cover if you have a commercial residence and you're conducting business out of your home. We won't cover the losses incurred because of that. Currency, precious metals, stock certificates, and valuable papers. I'm sorry, those are not covered under the FIP. And now, one of the things we also want to cover is cars. Anything that's self-driving, those should be covered under some type of comprehensive insurance that allows you to get a new automobile when you file your claim through your auto insurance. And personal property kept in basements. Now, here in Texas, we don't have a lot of basements, but when there are basements, if there's machinery that's vital to the house, for example, you got a furnace down there, or you got a freezer that keeps food, some of those items will be covered. But if you're keeping personal property, such as a TV, entertainment system, game consoles, those are the type of items that will not be covered under a flood insurance policy through the NFIP. So we can keep talking about this for a lot, but I know we have more in this presentation. So let's go on to the next slide, please. And I will sign this back over.
To me.
To
That's
Pam.
fine. Yes, thanks, Gil. Also, it is important to know that water damage from wind-driven rain is not covered by flood insurance. That rain coming in from the top, it does not meet the definition of a flood. Just like for the crazy 2021 winter storm, many structures had water damage from frozen and broken pipes. That was not considered a flood and not covered by flood insurance. After events with wind and flood damage, like the 2020 hurricanes, typically adjusters will look for signs of a general condition of flooding and document the flood water line. Damage below this line is typically flood damage. Damage above the water line is typically wind damage, such as water damage at broken windows or exterior doors, missing shingles, turbine damage, or water stains to the ceiling or down the walls. Now make sure your homeowner's insurance policy covers this type of damage, or secure a separate wind hurricane policy. Gil, back to you.
Thank you. So I touched briefly on basements a second ago, but let's go into a little more depth. So in FEMA's eyes, a basement is a subgrade on all sides of a house. So if it's, I know some 60s architecture had the sunken living room, right? If you had a subgrade on all four sides, that constitutes a basement. So just think of that. And we have a couple of diagrams that show you what we think of a basement. So if it's below ground on all four sides, it in our eyes is a basement. So some of the things covered under a basement is the furnace, water heater, electrical components, or sump pumps that are designed to keep the house in working condition. So I touched a few minutes ago on what is not covered under the private property. Clothes washers, for content, the following items are covered if they are located in a basement: the clothes washer, dryer, food freezer, portable air conditioning units, or window units. Those are the items that are acceptable because they help keep the house in function. What is not acceptable are those private products that we talked about a minute ago: clothes, TVs, game consoles. There's no coverage for furnishings such as wallpaper, carpeting, furniture, or contents located in the basement. So if you have a finished basement, understand that the finished aspect of this won't be covered under the NFIP, but the electrical components or major components that keep the house running will be covered. So keep that in mind. If you do have a basement and you have a lot of inventory down there, that would be a good time to relocate that to other areas in your house, maybe if not prone to flooding. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Gil. And this, there's a link to a video that we did just on coverage for basements. So it goes into depth on coverage for basements, because it is important that people understand what is and is not covered. So definitely check that out. And I can put the link into the chat later as well. And so we covered a little bit about, what is and isn't covered by your flood insurance policy. Talk to your insurance agent, your insurance company, to make sure you understand your policy. There are also other resources out there. If you're like, I don't understand the language, I don't understand the exclusions, again, talk to your agent, talk to your insurance company, even contacting Louisiana Department of Insurance, or contacting the NFIP to talk about your policy so you really understand what's covered and what's not covered. Now we're going to hand it over to Richard to talk about the disaster assistance side.
Hey, good morning all. So Richard Morris, Voluntary Agency Liaison with Fema. So whenever a disaster is declared, there are certain steps before that can actually happen. And so we generally like to portray this information to the public and to the different agencies, and especially to the state and the local municipalities, just to manage expectations. And so first off, there has to be a disaster that happens, obviously. It can be man-made or it can be natural. But so once that disaster actually happens, this is generally when you'll hear the governor declare a state of emergency. That's kind of the local parish or county do like a county or parish state of emergency. So that kind of generally starts the ball rolling. And because whenever the governor does a state of emergency, they have a certain time frame after that to request any type of assistance from FEMA. So that's step one. And then step two is a damage assessment has to be made. So just going off of the recent May floods, because that was the last thing that was declared for Louisiana, is the locals, including the state, do their own damage assessments first just to see what the damages are to homes and businesses, infrastructure, things like that, to see how bad the damages really are. A lot of the times, especially in Louisiana, they will put out a survey for survivors and businesses to go in and take photos of the damages and report what their damages are, just so the state can get a good idea of what's out there. And then that if the damages are substantial enough, that's when the state will and the governor will ask for preliminary damage assessments, which we typically call PDAs. And that's where the state and FEMA and the Small Business Administration will work together to verify what those damage assessments are. So for example, if the homes that the state or the locals are claiming are major or destroyed, basically that we will go out to see if that's actually true or not. Because of COVID, we have done a lot of these PDAs virtually, and the state's gotten really good at those. So that's one of the things that we do as well, just to verify what the damages are from what the state is reporting. And then just from the preliminary damage assessments, the governor will ultimately decide on the state level what type of assistance is needed. Is it beyond their capacity, or does the state have the substantial resources, either from the state level, the local level, or maybe even the nonprofits or the volunteer agencies to help survivors with any type of disaster-related unmet needs. Obviously, if the governor thinks that it's beyond their capabilities and resources to manage the event, that's when they'll send up a disaster declaration request through the regional administrator at the regional office. So for Region 6 in Denton, Texas, through Tony Robinson, and it makes it all the way up to headquarters. And then basically from that end, the FEMA headquarters will brief out the president on exactly what the damages are, the number of major and destroyed homes, businesses, infrastructure, and ultimately the president is the one who makes the decision of whether or not to approve a federal declaration or deny it. The president can also make the decision of, especially if the state is asking for individual assistance and maybe public assistance, the president can always approve one and deny the other. States also have the ability and opportunity to appeal those. Sometimes that does happen, especially if the state does not have all the damages reported. They can appeal to have that reconsidered, especially if there's additional damages or information. And then if the disaster is ever declared, the governor will be contacted, usually by the regional administrator, to notify them of the disaster declaration, whether it was approved or denied.
Richard, thanks so much for explaining that. Can you just super quickly give everyone kind of that difference between individual assistance and public assistance? Public assistance sounds like, hey, that would be dollars going to the public, right? But that's not the case, right?
Correct. Yes. Thank you, Rebecca. So the difference between individual assistance and public assistance is individual assistance is for individuals, so for your survivors, your homeowners, your renters, and it's for individuals and households. Where public assistance is more going to be for the local government, at the county level, at the parish level, for any type of reimbursement. So especially in the response phase, if there was a lot of maybe overtime for the fire department or the police, depending on what the situation was, or if there were any roads that were damaged, any buildings that were accessible by the general public, then that's what public assistance is going to be for. So those are the kind of the differences between the two.
Thanks, Richard.
So for FEMA Individual and Households Program, what we typically call IHP, is going to be under whenever the president approves for individual assistance, or IA, to be approved by FEMA, by the president to activate individual assistance. And like I said previously, that Rebecca brought up, was this is programs for those individuals and households, for those survivors that have those disaster related damages from any type of peril, any type of a disaster, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's from flooding, especially if it is flooding, since this is the purpose of the webinar. So our individual assistance program and policy guide, which we typically call our IAPPG, and it's also available on our public FEMA webpage. So our IA programs are geared towards homeowners and renters that are either uninsured or they're underinsured. And they have those disaster-related needs to get back to what we call a safe, secure, or safe, sanitary, and functional. So our IA programs are not geared to making a homeowner or a renter pre-disaster. We can never make somebody better or equal to what they were prior to the disaster, we can only make a survivor able to basically live in their home. So anybody that has, like for example, a crystal chandelier or marble or granite countertops, our IA programs are not, they are not functional to help a survivor get to that same level. So we're not going to be able to help a survivor get that granite or that marble countertop or that crystal chandelier, just because that's not it's whatever the basic necessity is to get that survivor back into to their home. And so one of the main programs that we offer through that is through our home repair for financial assistance that for those disaster related needs. And all of this is done through an inspection. I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but there is a process for the way we identify what those disaster related damages are through an inspection through a Fema personnel who will go out to the survivor's home and see exactly what those damages are that's affecting the home from being safe, sanitary, and functional. Obviously, the big thing within IA and our individual households program is we cannot duplicate benefits or services. And so one of these is being insurance, especially. So any survivors that register for FEMA assistance that have insurance, whether it's flood insurance, homeowners insurance, renters insurance, we do ask them to submit the documentation that they have so we know exactly what their insurance is and is not going to cover. And then lastly, we also, especially whenever the inspection happens, we look at the number of bedrooms occupied. So for example, a survivor, and I'll pick on Rebecca. So Rebecca has a 3-bedroom house and she's the only one living there. And say, you know, she had disaster related damages to just one room. So odds are our IA programs are probably not going to be able to assist her just because out of those 3 bedrooms, only one was damaged. And so with FEMA, because she has 2 other bedrooms that were not occupied at the time of the disaster, you know, we think that she is able to live in one of those other rooms that was not damaged. Obviously, survivors, though, have the opportunity to appeal if they feel like that they do not agree with FEMA's decision. So we only will pay for the number of bedrooms that were occupied at the time of the disaster.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I think that's a really important one. You know, if I'm a survivor and I'm looking at my house and I'm thinking, well, there was flood water in every room, you know, why isn't FEMA able to assist with helping with drywall and repairs for all of those rooms? So that's a really big thing to understand, that FEMA disaster assistance is going to be limited based on occupancy and the different types of living spaces that FEMA helps assist with. So thank you, Richard.
And so our individual and households program is broken out into 2 different components. And so one of them is our housing assistance, which is made up of home repair, which I touched on just a couple seconds ago, as well as our home replacement, which the difference between home repair and home replacement is survivors will be awarded funding for home repairs when the inspector goes out. And basically it's been identified that the house, just through general repairs, the home can be brought back to that safe, sanitary, and functional condition, where home replacement typically is going to be for those homes that have that major or destroyed damages, where the home is no longer through repairs can be made to that safe, sanitary, and functional. So especially during Hurricane Laura, and for flooding, we typically see it in mobile homes, those older mobile homes where the flooding is under the flooring and the insulation falls through. Generally, those are some of the scenarios that we see where home replacement is generally given to replace the home. Obviously, the amount of dollar assistance that we provide through our max grant does not help a survivor completely rebuild a home, which our max grant for under this fiscal year is $36,000, which we know that that's not nearly enough to replace a home, but there are other options out there for survivors, and that can also help a survivor move forward into whatever housing plan that they have, whether that be putting a down payment on a new home or like I said, whatever housing option that they prefer. Also, we do offer temporary housing. This is generally in the form of our rental assistance. So homeowners and survivors, or sorry, not homeowners and survivors, homeowners and renters who need a temporary place to stay, especially while they're waiting for their damaged home to be repaired, or whatever type of housing plan they are working towards. They can use that rental assistance to stay somewhere temporarily while they're figuring out those next steps. And then permanent construction, those are not always used. It's only used in rare circumstances, but that is, I know it was used in Hurricane Harvey in Texas and some other disasters, but that's basically a program that the state has to request for, and it's a special program where survivor in lieu of getting funding for home repairs is generally how we like to do it. Instead of that, applicants can have their home made repairs for up to a certain amount. But like I said, that is usually under some dire circumstances. Also, other needs assistance is the second component within our IHP, and these are for survivors where it's for personal property, transportation, medical, dental, and funeral expenses. All of these have to be related directly to the disaster. And so you're probably wondering, well, what's medical and dental have to do with the disaster? And we have seen some interesting stories and heard some interesting stories from survivors all the way up through, survivors were trying to evacuate from the floodwater and they tripped over a piece of debris, and maybe they cut their arm, or they tripped and they broke a bone. Anything that's related to the disaster, as long as it does not duplicate with their insurance policies, then we can be able to help cover some of those other needs assistance. And personal property, especially if it's only essential household items, we're not going to cover all of their personal property. And in all reality, it depends on exactly what the state has agreed that they will cover. There is other needs assistance admin plan that the state submits every year through region, where they state exactly how much they are willing to pay for certain household items or personal property items, and how much they're willing to spend for that, since it is a cost share. Our housing assistance is the funding and the financial programs for that is actually 100% federally funded by Fema. I know sometimes you all may have heard that there's generally a cost share between Fema and the state, but that only applies to, in terms of the IHP side, it only applies to the other needs assistance. So that's your medical, dental, funeral, transportation, personal property. And that is a 75% federal and 25% state cost share for the other needs financial assistance. And then which I think will be covered in another slide under the SBA, but we do have what we call SBA dependent items under the other needs assistance. So personal property, transportation, the group flood insurance policy, and child care assistance. So for survivors, whenever they register, depending on what they provide on their pre-disaster household income, we may determine that they are that they may qualify for a small business administration disaster loan, which is not just for businesses, but we'll touch on that in a couple of slides. But basically what SBA dependent means is regardless, let me back up. SBA dependent, what that basically means is for personal property, transportation, group flood insurance policy, and child care assistance, the survivor, in order for them to get assistance by FEMA, they either have to not be referred to the SBA, or they have to, if they are referred to the SBA, they have to get denied by the SBA for the disaster loan and then be kicked back to us for that additional assistance. And then especially for housing assistance and other needs assistance, just in general, IHP is not for businesses. And so it's only for a survivor's primary residence. And so any vacation homes, any rental homes are not going to be covered under our individual and households program. So personal insurance. So we always tell survivors, even, or at least for me, we mention, even if you have insurance, do register for FEMA, because we know sometimes, especially during disasters, especially in 2020, there were a lot of disasters in not only in Louisiana, but across the country. And so sometimes the claims process can take a little bit longer than anticipated, depending on just who the insurance companies are and how many claims they're trying to do throughout the country. So we always mention, please register even if you have insurance, but definitely file a claim first before you do register. And so we always tell survivors that they are responsible for calling their insurance company to file that claim. And then especially if they have homeowners insurance, where they can receive what we call ALE, or loss of use, so that additional living expenses, especially if they have it under their insurance company, to stay somewhere while their home is being repaired, especially if they had damages, or maybe if they had to evacuate. And so survivors may be insured, underinsured, or not insured, or they could have a combination. So you could have, example, a survivor who is insured, but after the adjuster comes out and does the settlement, they find out they're underinsured. So survivors can meet a combination of generally the two, or the three, especially if the survivor is insured, but maybe they got denied because their insurance policy is not going to cover those damages. So the personal insurance and the types of assistance that we can provide generally depends on the type of damage and the type of insurance that is going to be covered. So for example, a flood, a federal disaster for individual assistance under a major flood event, where a majority of the damages are going to be related to flood. So that's going to be under flood insurance. So if Rebecca has damages from flooding, she has flood insurance, but the inspector notices that the damages were maybe from hail, rain, or wind, and she has homeowners insurance, that's not going to be a duplication for us, because we know that her homeowners insurance is not going to cover flood. And I do see that Rebecca has flood insurance, which is good. I have it too, definitely. And so it depends on the type of insurance that the survivor has, and just what the insurance policy covers against the actual damages. And then, so water damage, that's, usually through a homeowners or renters policy, or it can be an additional rider. Fire damage, we know, is usually covered under the homeowners insurance or renters insurance, any type of earthquake damage, and then especially any type of wind damage, especially whenever we were dealing with Hurricane Laura, there was a lot of homeowners insurance policies, and not a whole lot of flooding damages that we saw. So we were having to make sure that survivors who had wind damages were letting us know what their homeowners insurance policies were going to cover. versus typically we deal with more flooding disasters in Louisiana. And also the other thing too is, especially since I know in Louisiana we dealt with this, and I know some of the people that live in Texas, my FEMA partners that live in Texas went through this winter storm. So if there's any insurance that the survivor has, homeowners or renters that can cover winter storms, then we typically make sure that that is being sent as well. And so we do advise survivors to submit any and all insurance documentation to know what their insurance company is not going to cover, to see if there's any additional assistance that we can provide.
And Richard, a question came in: would there be value in filing for FEMA assistance, even if insurance might technically cover it and just hasn't paid out yet? And there can be so many complications, of course, with making an insurance claim. So you said you would recommend that, but we are going to go over denials in a moment, and that might be where like a denial might come in when you apply for the assistance, but it's something that you can follow back up on. Is that what you would recommend, Richard?
Yes. So two things on that, Rebecca, is number one, is survivors, especially, and I don't know if we faced it in Laura, but there is a clause, I guess, if you will, under our individual and households program, where survivors who have insurance, so typically we will not issue an inspection for them because they do have the insurance, and that's usually where the claims adjuster comes out. But at times, if it takes more than maybe 30 days for their insurance company to maybe pay out, there are certain situations where FEMA may be able to come in and help provide some assistance or do that initial inspection, especially if the claims process is going to take a long period of time. I haven't seen any of those, but doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But we do have that clause for those survivors, and obviously we just need information, regarding that sent to FEMA. The other thing too, the example that I always use, especially in working with our nonprofits and voluntary agency partners, is why I recommend survivors calling FEMA even after they do their insurance is, and Rebecca, I'll pick on you again, is Rebecca, say that you file for your insurance for let's just say Hurricane Laura, and generally FEMA would give 60 days for survivors to register. Well, say it takes 90 days for your insurance to get back with you, Rebecca, and they deny you. Well, you never applied for FEMA, so you're kind of stuck now because there's no assistance for you from the federal side, where if you did file your claim and you did register with FEMA, and it does take, beyond that 60 days for you to get your determination letter back, and they did deny you, well, now you've still registered with FEMA, and now all you need to do is submit your insurance documentation or your denial letter, and that's where FEMA can come in and provide some additional assistance.
Oh, great tip there. Awesome.
Rebecca, before we move on to the next slide, let me add in one comment about flood insurance versus personal insurance. When you do have flood insurance and you submit a claim and you are giving your claim money, it's important to remember that the flood insurance claim is to be used for flood insurance damage and not for personal use, not for helping you with living expenses or any other expenses. It's important because if FEMA gives you insurance money to, let's just say, for example, to replace your air conditioner unit, and you use that money elsewhere, if there's another claim and our adjusters determine that the damage was not repaired during the first claim, you will be denied in the second event. So we can't duplicate benefits on the insurance side as well. So it's important to remember that the flood insurance money is to be used to repair the flood insurance damage experienced by that house, and not combine that with any type of personal insurance or tied into living expenses to help you and until you get back into your house. It's meant to repair the flood damages for that specific house. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. So for, I know one here says the 2020 Hurricane Laura example, safe sanitary functional repairs, that these were items that FEMA may have been able to assist with, but were not guaranteed from Hurricane Laura in 2020. So one of them is being property, so disaster damaged heating, ventilating, air conditioning systems, so HVAC, AC, as well as refrigerators and stoves, any type of appliances, and then electrical, any type of plumbing and utilities as well. Ceiling and roof damages, so any type of leaks that were caused from the disaster that damaged the ceiling and resulted in roof leaks, especially if it got into the electrical system. And then flooring, so that's your disaster damaged subfloor in occupied parts of the home. So if you remember a few slides ago where we mentioned where Rebecca owned a 3-bedroom home, but only one of them was occupied. And so just the subflooring in those occupied parts of the home, but not the floor covering. So that's generally your tile or your carpeting. And then windows, disaster related broken windows, but not blinds or drapes. And then any type of temporary expenses to pay for lodging. So survivors whose homes are damaged. So any type of hotel expenses, things of that nature. Sometimes we can help pay for those lodging expenses, especially if there was maybe an evacuation. And that's generally where sometimes too our rental assistance comes into play as well. And so the way I like to describe it is just like a snowflake, there's not two snowflakes that are alike. And so the same can kind of be said for survivors. Every survivor situation is different. And I mean, that can be from a survivor that lives at 123 Main Street and a survivor that lives right next door at 124 Main Street. They can have the same level of water damages, but the person that lives at 123 Main Street may have gotten that full $36,000 max grant. And then the person at 124 Main Street with the same level of water damages may have gotten $15,000. And of course, a lot of survivors, especially neighbors, they all talk to each other about their FEMA assistance and things like that. It's just common nature, generally what we see when we hear from survivors. But you know, and we can never comment on what somebody else got because we have to protect survivors' personal information. But maybe by us looking at the case, what that survivor at 124 Main Street did not know was that first survivor did not have any insurance. And so because of the damages they had, we found them eligible for the full max grant, where that survivor at 124 Main Street, they had insurance. And so because we can't duplicate, we could only give them so much money to help with make their home that safe, sanitary, and functional. So we can only provide assistance again, not to make them whole, but to get them back to that basic livable condition. And so rental assistance is often the first FEMA funding that goes out to individuals that we'll put out to the survivor, along with any type of home repairs as well, just because we know that through the hierarchy of needs, if you will, that sheltering and housing is kind of the first thing that survivors need. And then obviously any type of other assistance they need for personal property, transportation, anything else will come as a result of the inspection, and it'll come additionally. So denial letters are an eligibility notification from FEMA. So whenever survivors apply for FEMA assistance, and being a survivor myself, I will tell you that survivors get very discouraged and very disgruntled whenever they apply and they get that denial letter, because it's usually in bold and it says that they're denied and they just want to crumple it up and throw it in the garbage. And sometimes I can't blame them, but we definitely like to provide education to those survivors and to the general public that if they do see a letter where they are denied by FEMA, don't crumble it up, take a look at it, read over it carefully, because we're going to generally always provide additional information as to how they can rectify that denial. So most of the time denials are not, I don't call them denials, I call them pending. So survivors that register for FEMA assistance, especially if it's a flooding event and they told us that they had flood insurance, we'll send them a denial letter stating that they're denied because of insurance. But basically all that really means is send us your flood insurance documents once you have them, or if you have a flood insurance denial letter, send us that information. And we do pretty good at breaking that information down on the letter. We also have survivors who can call our FEMA helpline. And then we also have IA staff that get deployed to the IA disasters to provide some more guidance and answer questions and reach out to those survivors. So we just ask that they submit any type of missing documentation if they're ruled ineligible because FEMA saw that the home was already safe, sanitary, and functional to live in, but the survivors feel that that decision was wrong. They can always appeal through a contractor estimate to show that the disaster damages are causing the survivor to be unable to live in that home safe, secure, and functional. And the damages need to, and whenever we say safe, sanitary, and functional, what that means is that the disaster damages have to impact like your utility, so like your plumbing, your electrical, the structure of the home. And so we take all of those things into consideration as being damaged by the disaster. And denials for assistance in previous disasters does not disqualify survivors for current assistance. I know in Louisiana we've had 5 events now, and so and especially Calcasieu Parish has been federally declared 4 times now, and so each time that there is a new declaration and it's for a new event, whatever that new event was, survivors still need to register for that new event, and by them registering for maybe a previous event does not disqualify them for any type of new assistance.
Thank you, Richard. Remember, federal disaster assistance is not always available, and it's not meant to get you back to your pre-disaster condition. Shown on the screen here are the average flood insurance claim payment and the average FEMA IHP average for 2020's Hurricane Laura and the 2016 floods. For Hurricane Laura, your average flood insurance claim was $64,900, and the disaster assistance was only $3,070. And for the 2016 flooding, the average claim payment was $92,000, and the disaster assistance was $9,350. So as you can see, it helps to get flood insurance. And also remember that businesses and second homes or vacation homes do not qualify for FEMA's individual assistance. This is important information to pass on to your clients. Back to you, Richard.
Thank you. So I know a couple slides ago, I mentioned about the SBA, which is Small Business Administration. So it's not just for businesses, it's also disaster loans that are low interest that we offer to survivors. Generally, the low interest loans are about 1 to 2.5%. And so SBA disaster loans are for those individuals, in addition to businesses who meet the criteria and to help them rebuild, rebuild their home, relocate, and also replace any type of personal contents. And so besides insurance, and Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, I often say that SBA is, depending on how much a survivor is eligible for from them, is what's going to help that survivor get back to that pre-disaster. So if survivors don't have insurance, SBA is really their go-to to help that survivor get back to that new kind of that maybe that pre-disaster normal, or get them back to more than what FEMA was going to help them with, or their insurance was going to help them with. So a homeowner can receive up to $200,000 for their structure, where a renter, in addition to a homeowner, can receive up to $40,000 for personal property. And then a business can receive up to $1.5 million for, especially if their business was damaged or destroyed. And then survivors who do not qualify for an SBA loan then may be found eligible for other FEMA programs.
Absolutely. Thanks, Richard. I think many people are, surprised to find out that the majority of federal disaster assistance is actually probably a low interest loan. So you can see how putting that money into paying a premium for things like insurance can really help you recover faster, can be, less expensive than having to take out a loan or pay out of pocket for damages after an event. So we just have a little kind of screenshot image here from Hurricane Laura. Probably all of these numbers probably inched up a little bit, but you can see, how many people registered with FEMA. Now, Richard, not everyone who registers will end up being eligible for assistance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then in the middle section, you can see kind of the FEMA disaster assistance dollars that have gone out. And Richard explained, the kind of two different buckets of the individuals and households program. So housing assistance and then other needs assistance. So over 220 million. And I think that dollar amount might even be like 232 million at this point. And then on the NFIP side, again, Hurricane Laura was primarily a wind event for a lot of people. There was still flooding 100%. So you can see about 44 million in NFIP claims payments. And I think that number's gone up as well. But in that bottom right, if you look at the SBA number, and Richard, I'm not sure if this is, how much, if it's approved, if that means how much was kind of taken on by survivors or just how much was approved, but you can see how large that number is and how the, like Richard explained, doing that's going to help you be able to get to your pre-disaster condition, things like insurance or loans to help you get back to closer to your pre-disaster condition. And there was a question, how does the SBA loan applicant's credit score factor into the approval for a loan? And Richard, do you know anything about that, or we could get that one to SBA?
So the only thing I know, and we definitely will need to get more information from the SBA, but what I've been told is survivors who are referred initially to them, it's a soft credit check. So it doesn't impact the credit score, but survivors who are found eligible for a loan and they go through the rest of the process, I'm not sure what any type of credit score, I'm not sure if that's affected or not, but I just know that filling out the actual application, it's only a soft inquiry, it's not a hard inquiry.
Thanks, Richard. And we are approaching the 1 hour mark. Oh, we love talking, and we love hearing the questions and comments that come in as well. So we have a few more content slides and some resources, but I know we're approaching the hour. But if you're not aware of this is something that's really important to know about. So a lot of people are aware of the flood insurance requirement, like mandatory purchase requirement. Hey, where is a home? If you're getting that federally backed mortgage in a high risk area, that kind of mandatory purchase of flood insurance. Well, there's another flood insurance requirement, and this one is directly related to if you're receiving FEMA's disaster assistance for a flood event and you live in that high risk flood area. If you do, you're going to be asked to obtain and maintain flood insurance on that address. If you're an owner, that will be for the rest of the lifetime of that property. If you're a renter, for as long as you're returning to that rental address. So there are tons of properties in Louisiana that actually have this requirement. So the requirement actually passes to the next owner. So this is something that that person who receives the assistance and accepts this flood insurance requirement is supposed to notify the next owner. So this is, again, really important to know about, because if you don't obtain and maintain flood insurance, if there's a future flood event and there is a federally declared disaster, if you as that owner go to apply for assistance and you don't get and keep flood insurance, you could be found, hey, you're not compliant with this requirement. We can't help you with those kind of repair and replacement dollars because you didn't follow that flood insurance requirement. And also, if I'm a new owner of a home, if I go in to apply for assistance and FEMA finds that this structure address has the requirement, I, as the new owner, can also be denied for things like repair and replacement in a flood event. Again, we're talking about the high risk flood area. So something to know is if these, you guys know that flood maps change, as the risk changes, maybe as areas are restudied or new information is submitted to update the maps, a structure can actually be seen as moved out of the high risk area. So if that's the case, then this flood insurance requirement does lift. But there's a brochure here. I would definitely recommend checking it out. This is also something you could potentially provide for clients. You can order brochures like this for free from the NFIP. And then a subset of people who have this flood insurance requirement, typically these are going to be our lowest income survivors. Like Richard said, for certain households that either, maybe their credit score is so low, they're not even referred to the SBA, or they're referred to the SBA but denied, they may qualify for a 3-year group flood insurance policy. And that coverage right now is about $72,000. So our lowest income survivors, they can have, coverage up to $72,000, and it's for 3 years. Now, after that 3 years is over, they are expected to purchase a flood insurance policy on their own so that they can fulfill this flood insurance requirement. So there was a huge group of these group flood insurance policies that expired in 2019 after the 2016 flooding. And now we're seeing some of these group flood insurance policies come in after the 2020 hurricanes, and there will be more from the spring flooding. So, one concern with the group flood insurance policies is because we're able to provide this coverage to our lowest income survivors, of course, at the end of those 3 years, making sure that we put a big effort, state, federal, local, into educating these owners so that they can get a level of coverage they can afford. To fulfill this requirement on the disaster assistance side, you would only need to get as much coverage as your assistance was. So if I get $3,200 in disaster assistance, that's how much I would need to get. I would need to get at least that much in flood insurance to be seen as compliant for this requirement. So what does this mean for real estate professionals? So it just gives you a little bit here more about what that requirement is for homeowners and renters, but for a real estate professional, reminding your clients about disclosure. So this is a question, I think it's question 45 on the seller's disclosure. Has this property received federal disaster assistance? So pointing them to that. And then Louisiana Realtors on their site, they have a sample addendum that you can fill out, that you can have the owner fill out. And I think this is really awesome. I actually haven't seen this in other states, but it just makes it more clear. Where is this home? Is it located in the high risk area? Does it have this flood insurance requirement? How much would that new owner have to obtain and maintain? So I love this. I think it's awesome. And I think people in other states should do this as well. All right, Gil, how about some tips for buyers and sellers?
Okay, so tips about buying and selling. So if you're a buyer, it's your single largest investment is your home. So don't rely on disaster assistance. Make sure you have a flood insurance policy. Get those quotes before or during closing. I get the quotes before closing and have the policy written and in place at closing. Don't rely on disaster assistance. It's not going to be enough to rebuild your home. When you are buying, require the seller provide you NFIP loss history report and elevation certificate. Elevation certificate has a lot of good information on it that pertains to the house in general, not just floodplain management. It also gives you a really good idea of the amount of change in the area. If it's an older elevation certificate, make sure they get a new one. Read the disclosure carefully. Texas has been really good about a new comprehensive series of questions in the disclosure forms, which provides the potential buyer a lot of information. Okay, now sellers, if you have a subsidized flood insurance policy, something that's grandfathered now or pre-firm subsidized, include that in the marketing aspect of selling your home. You can actually assign that to the new owner, makes it more marketable. Consider projects that will mitigate loss in your home, elevating outside utilities, replacing materials that have flooded before with flood-resistant materials, helping them to be cleaned and basically get you back into the way of life a lot faster. Provide new buyers an elevation certificate. Now, if there has not been a lot of change in area, an older elevation will do, but in Texas, we have unprecedented growth. That means the ground truth has changed over time. So if your EC is over 10, 15 years old, I would encourage you to go ahead and order a new one, get that done and have that available for the new owner. And disclose flood loss history. As an existing client of the NFIP, you get a renewal every year. In that renewal, you will get a one-page flood loss history report that reflects all the flood history on that house, not the owners of that house. And that's important. That can bring a lot of information to the table when you're trying to buy or sell, especially if you've been fortunate and have not had any flood loss history to show. So these are a couple of tips for the buyers and sellers. There's a lot more, but we're going to continue on to the resources. Rebecca?
Thanks, Gail. Lots of resources listed here. This PDF will be available on the Louisiana REALTORS site, but a lot of the ones that we talked about, I'll point out just a few. The FEMA flood mapping and insurance exchange. This is an awesome number, 877 FEMA map. I would save it in your cell phone if I were you. You can also give this out to your clients. You can call the FEMA mapping and insurance specialist, ask them general questions about flood insurance and flood maps and map changes. So really good resource to have there. And some of the individual assistance resources as well. And also a link to Pam Lightfoot's site with the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development State Floodplain Office. And then also you can follow the NFIP on LinkedIn if you don't already. They put out some really good tips. It's directed towards the insurance agent audience, but a lot of things of course flow across for real estate professionals as well. So really good resources to check out here. And then also, if you visit agents.floodsmart.gov, the link is here. They have a resource library where if you're really social media savvy, whatever platform you're on, you can take graphics like these, and they even have sample social media language that you could just take and post to help educate and inform your clients. And so we have our contact information here. Please reach out to us. We appreciate you so much for taking your time, and we'd love to get to some questions now. So I'll go back up through the chat as well. I'm gonna stop sharing. Just following up on the flood insurance requirement part, again, if it were up to me, I would have some type of open source site where everybody could look up, hey, does this structure have this requirement? Unfortunately, that duty to notify the next owner is on that recipient who receives the disaster assistance. But I hear you that it definitely can be complicating if that notification is not made, potentially even legal ramifications, but helping your clients be able to understand this is important, and FEMA and others doing a better job of educating survivors on what their requirement is. Richard, do you have anything to add on that one?
Only thing I was going to ask Rebecca was, you mentioned the survivor, I guess, resident to resident. So for survivors, I guess, where they're purchasing it through a realtor or through a mortgage company, is that a requirement like, will they know that they have to purchase, that they have a flood insurance requirement versus just two residents that are just doing a purchase between themselves or succession?
On the FEMA requirement side, you're talking about the disaster assistance flood insurance requirement, or no?
Yeah, just flood insurance requirement in general.
Yeah, I know what, FEMA recommends, that if you're that, only kind of that person that received that assistance can call FEMA and ask about, hey, my case and all the assistance that I received. For instance, if you're advising someone to fill out the sample addendum and they say, well, I can't remember how much assistance I got, they can call the disaster assistance line. They can call FEMA and say, I know I received assistance in 2016. I can't remember what the dollar amount was. That owner, whoever got that assistance, can call back into FEMA to get that information. But I definitely, hear you guys that notification process definitely could be improved. And somebody had mentioned about, we definitely recommend that the current owner request their flood loss history. Gil, can you tell us a little bit more about this? I know that the owner, the person with the policy, will get this flood loss history mailed to them once a year. I know I just got mine and no flood losses. But they can also request this at any time of the year, either through email or actually just calling that 877 FEMA map number is one way that owner can request their flood loss history. But again, it can take some time to get this, to be able to give it to, potential buyer or buyer. And the market's really hot and fast right now, right? So people being able to do their due diligence on the flood risk that this property has. And the flooding history, of course, is really important. Not things that you want to find out later on after you've already closed.
So let me elaborate a little bit more on that question as well. Most people may not be aware of this, but every time that you buy a home, mortgage companies actually do a floodplain determination on that property. If they find that property is in an X zone, area minimal flooding, mandatory purchase of flood insurance will not apply. If the house is inside of our FEMA identified special flood hazard area, mandatory purchase of flood insurance will apply, and the lenders will inform the homeowners that this is a requirement and allow them to go out and shop for their own flood insurance. If they do not buy their own flood insurance and they continue with the mortgage, then the lenders will do a forced place policy on their behalf. And sometimes that's not advantageous to the homeowner. So we encourage the homeowners to get out there and do their own research, determine if a flood insurance policy through the National Flood Insurance Program is beneficial, or if they want to go for a private sector flood insurance policy. As long as they're covered and they meet the requirements from the lenders, then the mortgage will be good to go, and they'll have the proper amount of coverage when it comes to flood insurance.
Skill, and that requirement is different than the flood insurance requirement after past federal assistance for a flood event. So again, all the more reason to get flood insurance, even if you aren't required based on your mortgage, all the more reason to get it, especially if you know that you're buying in an area that, hey, I know this neighborhood was flooded, in 2016 flooding. All the more reason to purchase insurance. And then Richard, do you, is this something that you see? I mean, that can be rather heartbreaking if an applicant is coming to FEMA with flood losses after a federally declared disaster, but they're found to be non-compliant with the flood insurance requirement that was based on past disaster assistance. Was that something that you see, Richard?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is, especially in states that are susceptible to flooding, especially succession homes. So an ancestor who passed down a home generations to generations, and the current the current relative who's now living in the home that had flooding damages, turns out way in the past. One of their ancestors registered for assistance and got FEMA, funding for home repairs, and we required, that flood insurance be maintained on the property after 3 years. And just, from the home being passed down generation to generation, it was never really echoed that the flood insurance requirement was ever there. So we do see those. And I'm like you, Rebecca, it is very heartbreaking for those, because a lot of them, they just honestly don't know, and they just kind of don't know what else to do from that point.
Thanks, Richard. And just to clarify with that, mandatory purchase based on your mortgage typically is going to apply in the high-risk flood area. The flood insurance requirement based on that past disaster assistance for a flooding event, again, that's going to apply only in the high-risk area. So, question came into the chat about, flooding in the zone X, the area of minimal flooding, but where obviously it can also flood. So again, if that owner has received assistance, that is still something that they should be putting on the seller's disclosure. That's definitely something you would still want to disclose. What's your flood zone? Have you received past disaster assistance? But again, if that structure is in the moderate to low risk area, that flood insurance requirement based on past disaster assistance won't apply. Does that make sense? So that only applies in the high risk area. Again, flood insurance is still recommended. Thanks everyone for your questions and comments. It obviously, insurance can be complicated. Obviously, a disaster type of situation, whether it's federally declared or not, is super stressful. So the more information that we, can give people before they're in that, high stress type of situation, the better. So we appreciate, everybody's participation today, and glad that this will be available. So thank you, Angela, the recording link and a PDF of the presentation being available later as well.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see y'all next month.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.